Hi friends! Today we're gonna be doing some more prompts in Create This Book. And the first one I chose for today is create a physical collection of specific objects. Choose one of the following objects to collect on this page: buttons, feathers, strings, or wrappers. Well, I didn't use any of the examples, but instead I decided to do postage stamps because I thought that might be much cooler. And just look at how beautiful these are. They are from Germany from the 1960s, and each set depicts one fairy tale. They need a proper space to be stored in, and I didn't just want to glue them directly onto the pages, so instead I made this miniature postage stamp album. I reused that little card where the postage stamps came in and glued it onto some black paper with double-sided tape. Of course, we need something more to fill the entire double page, so my idea was to paint two of the stamps in large size. The first one I chose is the 20 cents stamp from the Snow White series. The scene depicted here is where Snow White bites into the poisoned apple that she got from the evil queen dressed as a hag. I thought a good medium to use here would be gouache, and it worked quite well, so I think that was a good choice. But let me tell you, although the style looks rather simple, it was so much work to finish this piece.
Oh no, I called you plenty, how you wanna run? Should've got a warning, have you had enough? You want me to find it tonight, I wanna find it tonight. I'm changing you back.
Yeah, so here we have the finished huge stamp, and for reference, this is the small original one. And sorry, my fingers are so dirty, but yeah, I'm happy with the result. Okay, number 2 is the 20 cents stamp from the Sleeping Beauty series. Okay, to be accurate, it was not 20 cents, but rather 20 Pfennig, because back then Germany still had the currency that came before euro. I think this stamp took me even longer to finish. I mean, already the sketching out was a bit tricky on that one, and then yeah, the rose bush and the bed with all the tassels, that took quite a while to do.
Oh no, you gotta know how to find you. I'll follow the tone of the lights that surround you. Wherever you go, girl, I know where to find you. Do you think I'm crazy for choosing love? Baby, I wanna be with you for the long. I think I wanna make it go on and on. Baby, I think I'm craving your vibe, your vibe. Oh no, I called you plenty, how you wanna run? Should've got a warning, have you had enough? You want me to find it tonight, I wanna find it tonight. I'm changing you back.
And once again, here is the finished large stamp and the small original one in comparison. And now both stamps are ready for gluing them into the book. First, I prepared the page and I just did a simple blue background with acrylic markers. And then I glued in the small postage stamp album with my physical collection, as well as the two large-scale stamps. So far, so good, but of course, we still need the fun fact. So here's some interesting information about postage stamps for you. The UK issued the world's first adhesive stamp, the penny black, in 1840. Because they were the first, British stamps are the only ones in the world that don't require the country's name to be printed on them. Into the book with it, and we have another page done. The second prompt for today is create textures. Fill this page with a variety of different textures. Okay, I have an idea in mind for that. So lately, I've been really enjoying those coloring guidebooks where you learn how to color or draw different patterns, textures, and so on. And this is exactly what we will do for this page. Just try out different textures that I learned from these books or from other tutorials on YouTube. I prepared a sheet with different shapes, so we have squares, circles, and octagons to make it a bit more interesting. And we're jumping right in with the first texture, which is honeycomb. For that, I did a yellow to orange gradient with alcohol markers. Then grab some darker alcohol marker to do the combs and a yellow acrylic pen to do the outlines of the combs. And finally, I added some more depth with a colored pencil. I finished off everything with a white acrylic marker to add highlights and shine. Okay, next up is cobblestone. On a light gray background, I drew random stones with alcohol markers in different tones of gray. And then I used colored pencils to add shadow to all of them. To finish it off, I used a white acrylic pen to add highlights. The next texture is gonna be wood. I started with a light brown background and then used a darker tone to add the wood grain. And finally, I went over it with a dark brown colored pencil to make it look more organic and natural. Next, I'm creating water with a light blue background and some darker blue splotches. And then I used a white gel pen and pencil to add this kind of reflection on the surface. And another one that I have messed up. So this is also my second try on the brick texture. So I'm coloring all the individual bricks with different shades of brown and orange, then use darker tones to add shadow and texture, and then a gray acrylic pen to add the grout. Finally, adding some more depth with colored pencils and highlights with a white acrylic pen. The next one is one of my favorites. So we're creating foam, starting with a colorful background that I blended with a colorless blender. Then I used a white gel pen to draw all different sizes of bubbles, also filled in all the spaces between the bubbles, and finally added some highlights to them. Good, new sheet, new luck. Well, not so lucky. I also needed several attempts on this strawberry texture here. I did it with a red background and then added the seeds with a white acrylic pen and then all kinds of highlights with white acrylic pen and pencil. And finally adding some shadow to the seeds with a dark brown colored pencil. And speaking about strawberries, let's throw in some fun facts at this point. Strawberries are not true berries, but rather aggregate accessory fruits that wear their seeds on the outside. These roughly 200 seeds on the outside of a strawberry are actually individual dry fruits called achenes, which are botanically classified as nuts. The strawberry plant belongs to the rose family. Strawberries are packed with vitamin C and antioxidants and act as natural teeth whiteners. On to the next texture, which is tiles. I drew several squares with different shades of pink, then used a darker tone to add the shadows and a white acrylic pen to add the highlights and the grout. This was an easy one, I enjoyed it. Next, I tried stones. I colored the stones with orange, green, and gray and used a colorless blender to give them some texture. And once that was done, I used a black fine liner to fill in all the gaps between the stones. Then I grabbed a black pencil to add shadows and a white acrylic marker to add highlights. The next texture is caton, so basically leather on a chair. And I used colored pencils and a white acrylic marker on top of a brown surface, but it was really difficult and I'm not fully happy with the result. Anyways, moving on to the next texture, which is rust. Therefore, I did this pale green background, and then I used different brown alcohol markers to do those rust patches, and then added some gray to make it look even more weathered. Then I wanted to try the stained glass effect. Therefore, I did a colorful gradient, then added random shapes with a black fine liner, and then used the colorless blender and a white acrylic pen to give it that glassy texture. The next one is raindrops on a window. So for that, I'm doing a blue gradient as background, and then I use the colorless blender to add the raindrops. And finally, I added highlights and shadows with a white acrylic pen and colored pencils. The last texture on this sheet is knit, therefore I'm doing a colorful background with alcohol markers, then use the colorless blender to add the knit pattern, and then just grab a colored pencil to give it more depth. So 4 more textures left and then we are done. Let's try some roof shingles. So I colored them in different colors with alcohol markers, then used a gray marker to add the shadows and a white acrylic marker to add the highlights. The next one is also super fun and actually not too hard. We're gonna try bubble wrap. Therefore, I just did a gray background and then used a white gel pen to add all those air pockets. No collection of textures is complete without fur, so of course I also had to try leopard fur. Therefore, I used alcohol markers in different shades of brown as well as colored pencils to give it that furry texture. Last but not least, let's draw a quilt. Therefore, I just did different patches of fabric in different colors, then added some patterns on them. And finally, most important, I used a white acrylic pen to add all the stitches and some more highlights. Now that all the textures are done, let's assemble them in the book. I just did a very plain background for the prompt box and the fun fact, then glued in all the different textures and finally labeled them. I really love how this page turned out. What do you guys think? So, time for the recap. We created a physical collection of postage stamps and a page of textures. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time!